All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Hello. Thank you all for joining on. Awesome. Everyone keep on popping on there saying your name, where you're from, and what you do there in your facility. That would be great. So today we're going to give you this Lockout Tagout webinar, but the next webinar we're going to do next month is going to be a crash course on the NFPA 70E. It's going to be taught by Kyle Smith, who's one of our directors, and also our management of training, Caitlin. And I think I'm penciled in for hosting that. We'll see. Fingers crossed. Hopefully I do really good on this one. Good morning, Keaton. And also, we will send out a link for you all to get hooked up with that webinar. All right. That's my glamour shot. My name is JJ Harrison. I've been an electrician for the past 25 years, which puts more age on me than I want to admit. I started here at Herzig Engineering about 4 years ago in the field and then transitioned to an office role. So my biggest thing when it comes to electrical safety is that it doesn't matter if you've spent 1 week or 40 years in the electrical trade. There's always more you need to learn when it comes to electrical safety. All right, so there's a couple of questions we want to start off with. If you guys wouldn't mind, does your facility have a lockout tagout program? So we're going to put this up in the chat. And if you guys could help us out real quick and give us some answers, no one's going to be in trouble if you don't, but we just kind of want to know where everybody's at so far. So we'll give this a few more seconds to see everyone's answers. Right now, we're up to 76% of the audience for an answer. Oh, jumped up to 82. Thank you, guys. All right. Awesome. Thank you, Vinny. All right, let's move on to our next question. Thank you, everyone, for answering that one. So let's see. No? Okay. So a couple of modules we're going to go over real quick. The control of hazardous energy, the basic requirements. Module 2, practical lockout tagout compliance. And 3, how to improve your lockout tagout programs today. So I would like to do is present to you, like I said, our esteemed colleagues next to us, Sandy and Bill. And what I'm going to do in here real quick as we get their stuff set up is I'm going to exit stage right, and then I'm going to hand it over to Sandy and Bill. Sandy and I have worked together in the trade in the past, and Bill has taught me so much when it comes to electrical safety. So are we ready to send it over? That's right. We're ready to send it over.
Okay. Hi there. Good morning. My name is Sandy. I'm here today, have experience with Herzig with our arc flash studies and being able to is lockout tagout something that you need to implement in your facility if you've not already, simply because people get hurt. This is a big deal because it is on OSHA's top 10 list for the last 10 years. It's been on the top 10 list many times in the top 5 of the most cited incidents when OSHA comes on site. So what does compliance do for you? It helps to eliminate those potential injuries or fatalities to your employees by complying with the OSHA 1910.147 and the NFPA 70E Article 120 lockout tagout standards. What you're going to do is help your people go home safely. So today we're going to talk about the basics of the requirements for lockout tagout. Hopefully this is something you already have in place. This would be a good refresher if you do, but if you don't, we're going to talk about how you can get started. So as JJ mentioned, we've got a couple of modules we're going to go over, and I just want to be able to, help you to understand really what your role is in helping to keep your employees safe. So module 1 is going to be the basic requirements of controlling hazardous energy. what are those basic requirements?
We'll go over sections 1, 2, 3, and 4. 1 being the written lockout tagout program, building your lockout tagout program, training your employees. That's a major step. Make sure that your employees are aware of the lockout tagout program. And then we'll go over audits.
So when you're writing a lockout tagout program, it's really going to be the policy that's in place. This is the umbrella that includes all of the training requirements that you have for your facility, how your procedures are handled, how you are going to refresh the training when you see that there is an issue with employees being able to understand those procedures. We're going to dig into all of that. So what does the program outline? It's the steps to ensure that you're keeping your employees safe. And this is going to include any employees that are going to be exposed to various hazardous energies. So what are some of those energies? It could be electrical. As we mentioned, we all have experience in the electrical industry, so that's the number one concern for us. But it's not just your electrical workers. It could be HVAC. It could be your maintenance techs that might be exposed to hydraulic, pneumatic, thermal energy. There are a variety of different energy sources that you need to be aware of, be able to document those and put those into procedures, equipment-specific procedures. So it is a requirement by OSHA. As I mentioned, it's the OSHA 1910.147 is the standard that determines what needs to be done, and writing those equipment-specific procedures is going to come next. So how do you build a procedure? This procedure needs to be, like I said, equipment specific. You have a variety of, let's say, air handling units. You have boilers. You have pumps. There's going to be a specific step for locking out each energy source on each of these pieces of equipment. So the procedures. Are we going ahead here? Oh, sorry, we got a poll question. I apologize. Bill, you want to take the question?
Yeah. The other thing is too, with as Sandy mentioned, the electrical, because we're electricians, that's our primary, but what you have to realize is that all of these energy sources will work together on one piece of equipment. So all of them pertain to the procedure. So anyway, our polling question is, when did lockout tagout officially become an OSHA standard? What year?
All right.
You can respond to that in the chat box over there. JJ looks like he's holding his hand up, so we might let him have a chance.
So just speaking of when did the OSHA become a standard, was this something that you learned when you first got into the trade? Was it a standard at that point?
I think about 4 or 5 years ago, I learned that it was a standard. So that was, no, 43 years ago, no, I did not.
Right. And I'm thinking 27 years ago when I first got into the trade, our standard for locking out electrical sources was you use electrical tape. You throw electrical tape on a breaker, you shut that breaker off, you put some tape on it. That was standard practice. And I'm amazed at how much I didn't know.
When I was driving service truck, prior to ever knowing anything about NFPA 70, I was expected to work energized. Lockout tagout wasn't a part of my job description. In fact, if I probably did shut things down, I wouldn't be working there very long. So it's the industry has changed in the 43 years that I've been here, from just whatever you got to do, get it done. And now industry has figured out it costs more money for me to have an accident than it does for them to train me. Give me the time, give me the procedures, give me the PPE so that I can do my work safely. So that's, in my career, that's the thing that really stands out. I didn't know about NFPA 70E until 2001, I think it was. I got into estimating for a shop I was working at. I had to start providing an arc flash analysis on new jobs. So that was probably the first time I knew anything about it.
Absolutely.
NFPA 78 came out in 79, which coincidentally is the same year I started. So
And I have a similar history. When I look back at my experience, this was not something that was taught. Like you said, we were taught how to work safely on energized components, electrically speaking. That's again our background, but we didn't shut anything off. We didn't shut anything off. It was just not part of it. And one of the things that we teach with our arc flash trainings is de-energize. So when we're talking de-energize equipment, going hand in hand, lockout, tagout, is we're going to go a step further. We're not just going to de-energize. We're going to lock it out so that it can't accidentally be turned back on and possibly hurt somebody. So how are we doing on our polls, JJ? Did we give a chance for everybody to answer? Are we there? So the question was, when did lockout, tagout officially become an OSHA standard? And it was in the 80s. In fact, there was development in 1982 and it became legal, official in 1989. So in the 80s, this was after Bill got started in the trade and not long before I got started in the electrical industry. But even still, it wasn't really practiced. It wasn't something that was part of our mindset from the beginning. What we've learned, though, like I said, in the last 10 years, this is a huge deal. Many, many people are getting hurt because of non-compliance with lockout, tagout. So we're going to go ahead and dig in more to what it takes to put these procedures together and how you can train your employees. So a written lockout, tagout program includes very specifics on how employees are going to be trained and having that documentation that training has occurred. You're going to do field audits. The program itself is going to cover all of the specifics regarding group lockout situations, shift changes. Your program needs to have consequences. It should be spelled out in your program that a lock is never to be cut off, that the employee who places the lock on a piece of equipment is the only one who would take that lock off. And it also is going to cover the specifics of what locks are used. What are those locks used for? Now, there are requirements for all of those details, but again, your program, your policy is where these details, these specifics are going to live. So it's the umbrella over all of the guidelines of how you're going to function under a lockout, tagout policy, including your audits, all of that.
the one thing too, that like what Sandy was mentioning, all of this is part of the program. That one statement, consequences. You can have all the rules, procedures, training, equipment, PPE. If you do not have consequences for violations, everything else is worthless. So it has to be monitored and it has to be, dealt with. If somebody's doing something not safe, they need to be retrained. The procedure needs to be rewritten. Any of these things will make a difference. But again, you have to back it up.
Very true. Very true. So when you're building your lockout, tagout procedures, first thing you're going to do is you need to identify what hazardous energies are in your facility. Now, there are many variations on equipment, but you're going to have some basic energy sources, and identifying what those are, obviously electrical, pneumatic, it could be hot water or steam, it could be hydraulic. You could have a variety of different fuel sources. This could be natural gas, it could be propane, it could be fuel oil, it could be diesel. What are some others?
I mean, your gravity is a big one.
Gravity's huge.
A lot of times we don't realize that a piece of equipment's going to move once you kill the energy source.
These would be the kinetic. So the control of gravity or control of motion would be another example of those kinetic energies. So identifying what those hazardous energies are in your facility first, and being able to go to each piece of equipment. And now you're going to identify the isolation point. So something that comes up regularly, a question that we hear frequently is, what about a light curtain? What about an emergency power off, right? You've got those red buttons. A lot of times you can pop one of those. Is that an isolation point? Is that a lockout point?
Nope.
Not at all. Not at all. So what does isolation point mean? This is where you are able to, for electrical, verify absence of voltage. For other energy sources, you would be able to verify that there's zero pressure. There's for pneumatic, for steam, for any of the gases, you want to make sure that there is no pressure. It's a valve that is going to be shut off. It's a point where it can be locked out and isolated so that there is no possibility of that energy, whatever it might be, reaching the machine where there is servicing or repair being done.
Which leads us into the steps for shutting down the equipment. Once you've figured out what your isolation points are, some equipment has to be shut down in a proper procedure, or you're going to create another hazard. So you have to figure out what that what those steps are.
Sequence. So we talk about that being our order of operations when we're looking at a piece of equipment. So again, you're identifying what energy sources are there. You're identifying where those isolation points are. Now it's important to identify the order in which you are going to shut down a piece of equipment. It's not always going to be electric first. You don't always want to disconnect the electrical source because you may have, especially in a gravity situation, thinking of equipment such as a press, if you have to raise a piece into position where it can be pinned or blocked before you shut the electrical off, then that is going to affect your sequence and the steps. Identifying the order is what's going to come next. And then we're wanting to verify that absence of voltage or that any of the energy has been dissipated. So there will be a step to verify that you have done that you have accomplished that lockout isolation, and that you no longer have in the situation of kinetic that might be stored energy, perhaps. It could be a flywheel, a spring. There are a variety of different things that have to be identified in the isolation and then the verification, making sure that there really truly is a safe work situation. So what's the next step?
Returning the equipment back to service once maintenance or servicing is complete. So your procedure is going to have to also tell the sequence of events to go back and using that equipment again energized, all the different energy sources return to their working state.
So one of the things that you will do before you are returning the equipment back to service, communication from start to finish. As we're talking about locking out a piece of equipment, the communication is important, that you are communicating to other employees, other workers in the area that the equipment is going to be locked out. And then in returning back to service, you're going to verify that all tools have been removed, that you don't have anybody who is in a hazard zone. Everybody is moved out of harm's way. If you've got equipment, particularly equipment that is the movement, sudden, when you start up the equipment, sudden movements can occur. You want to make sure that people are out of the way. So communicating that the equipment is going to be returned to service, making sure that it is ready to do so, and then removing those locks. And generally what we do is follow the reverse order. The order that was set up, the sequence in locking out the equipment, will be done in reverse when you're putting it back into service.
And the communication is key, just because of the fact that somebody, if they don't know what you're doing and you shut something down, they may start their own investigation, which could lead them into a hazardous situation. So that's why communication throughout this procedure is very, very important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we've talked about identifying your energy sources, locking out equipment, building a program, and then building procedures, equipment-specific procedures. What about training the employees? This has got to be the most important aspect, I believe, of a good, solid lockout, tagout program, because the only employees who should be locking out your equipment are authorized employees. So how do we know who's authorized? There is training involved in determining that a person is authorized and capable of doing so. They need to be knowledgeable about the equipment. They need to understand how to read a procedure, be able to follow the steps. They need to be familiar with the equipment. Now, the procedure should be written in such a way that they can be easily followed, but you've got employees sometimes who are, let's say, operators that might think, I've seen the maintenance guy come in here and turn this off. I can do this. And they'll get in there and they'll get hurt. So having training and determining who's authorized versus who's affected is very important. Now, there are a variety of employees that would need to be trained. So some examples of some of those employees who would potentially be exposed to the hazards. We've mentioned electricians, maintenance techs,
Mechanical.
absolutely. Your
any-
HVAC
any
guys,
of your different trades.
any of the trades, and
Operators.
absolutely, absolutely. So if you've got machine operators who are familiar with the equipment, here's the thing, you can have someone who is authorized on a piece of equipment, not facility wide. You can have different levels of training for your employees and different levels of who's authorized and who's not. I might be authorized on a piece of equipment and not another. So the training is specific to the situation, to the equipment.
To the task. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So before we jump ahead to the audits, training needs to be refreshed.
Yeah, if there's any changes to the equipment,
Mm-hmm.
the procedures have to be updated and the people have to be trained to the new step. And again, it needs to be done at a minimum of every 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
More often is better, but the main thing is make sure that everybody's trained, because it's just like the fact with the consequences. If you have the procedures and if people are not aware of it, if they don't have access to it,
Mm-hmm.
it's a fail. It has to be brought to their attention. They have to be trained on it and know what they're dealing with, know what their limitations are, know where they can do things and where they can't.
Mm-hmm. A couple of questions that have come up when we're on site, regarding the training is, we have procedures that are in place, but we don't have access to them. So, if you have employees who are authorized, who are expected to be able to lock out equipment, they need to have access to these procedures. Now, it's not a requirement that those procedures be mounted on the equipment. That's best practice to have your procedure right there on the piece of equipment. But sometimes it's in a binder at the doorway. When you come into a mechanical room, you'll have these procedures there, but your employees who are trained need to know where those procedures are. Your authorized employees need to have access to your procedures so that they can use them and can implement them in their process of locking out the equipment.
And in the new world, digital works just as well.
It does. It does not have to be a printed procedure. It can be digital. And that comes up. We're at facilities doing analysis and audits of their lockout, tagout programs. Just because we don't see those procedures mounted doesn't mean that they're not there. They have to be available. They have to be accessible to the employees who will be using them. There are a variety of different ways that you can audit those programs and procedures. Of course, the annual field audit is required. You have to do an audit of your procedures each year. And this is where we fall back to that training. If there are any changes to your procedures, then refresher training is required. You need to retrain your authorized employees and your affected employees. There's training for affected as well. It is more training of being aware of what the hazards are and knowing what their limitations are, like Bill said, knowing what not to do. But anytime you are auditing a procedure and there's been a change, retraining, refresher training is going to be required. So what else do we audit? We audit our procedures annually. Well, we also audit our employees.
Yep.
We want to make sure that they do know how to read a procedure, how to follow the steps of a procedure, and be able to lock out a piece of equipment safely and then put it back into service.
All right. So we got a poll question up here again. So what is the first step to shutting down and locking out equipment? What's the first one? You guys can answer this in the chat. JJ's over there keeping track of all of this so that when we get to the end with the Q&A, then you'll be able to get some answers from it. But let's see what we end up with on this one. All of you that can, try and give an answer to this one.
So, what is the first step to shutting down and locking out equipment?
Yep.
I know that for me, it's important to have access to that procedure. Mm-hmm. But I frequently am working with others who may be a different trade We're all working on a piece of equipment together, and having some communication is key. Having a plan, having a starting point where everybody is on the same page, being able to discuss what are we doing, what's the service that needs to take place. Are we replacing a pump, for example? We've got a boiler or a chiller that we've got a bad pump, and we're going to talk through what's the plan of action. We are going to discuss our steps. We're going to do a job safety planning pre-brief. That's a great word. Absolutely. Talk about who's doing what, who's responsible for each task,
Who's affected?
exactly, who's affected. So yeah, lots of discussion to go on before we get started. How are we on getting results here? Has everybody had a chance to answer? We're still waiting on a few people to be able to answer. What would be the first step? If you haven't answered yet, go ahead and jump on in there. And your answer is not going to be flashed up on the screen. It's okay. All right, we're getting a few more. We're at about 75%. Okay.
I think we're good to go.
We're good. We're good. So the correct answer would be to notify employees. You're going to want to notify others. So, I talked a little bit about that communication being important. If it's a team lockout, if you've got a group lockout situation, but even if it's just one person alone who's working on a piece of equipment and they're locking that out, the first thing that you want to do is notify others who are potentially going to be in harm's way. This machine's going to be down. I'm going to be working on it. This would include people who are affected employees. This may be operators. If it's the maintenance technician, for example, who is going to be working on the piece of equipment, he's locked it out. He is going to make sure that he notifies the other employees in the area first. Make sure that they're aware.
My wife says communication is really good in a marriage.
Well, you know what? Your wife
Must
is very
be.
wise. She is very wise, for sure. Yes, absolutely. So continuing on with the audits, we've talked about auditing your programs and procedures, making sure that that's done. Auditing your employees, making sure that they understand how to read a procedure, how to follow a procedure, how to lock out equipment safely, and then how to return it to service. And then if there are any deficiencies identified, you're going to do some retraining.
Okay, so our module 1 recap. So section 1 is the written lockout tagout program. You need that. Section 2 is building your lockout tagout program. Section 3 is training of employees. And then section 4 is the audits.
Absolutely. So now we're going to dig into the practical compliance of lockout tagout. So what does that look like? What do you need for a lockout tagout program to be functional? What are the practical aspects? So I've got a few examples here of some items that are important to include in your lockout tagout program. We've got locks and tags, and we're going to talk a little bit about those as well as a couple of examples of some procedures. So what are the requirements for, let's start with just the tags first of all. What are the requirements for tags? They have to be identified for the purpose, first of all. They've got to be durable. What you see on here, danger, do not operate. We've got a place for the name of the person who's working on the equipment. There are a variety of requirements per the OSHA and NFPA that the wording has to be specifically for the purpose of lockout tagout. Now, this is different than an out of service tag. So you want to make sure that it's dated. When we go into a facility and we see that there's a name, there's a tag on a breaker, for example, and it's been there since 2010, that's not an appropriate use for a tag. They need to be durable, though. They need to be able to withstand the environment that they are in. They have to be applied in a way that they cannot be easily removed. So that is what we're looking for in a tag. Now, can you use a tag alone without a lock? OSHA does allow it, but your policy has to address that.
Written that way.
Written that way so that your policy says that a tag carries the same weight as a lock. And by removing a tag, oftentimes that is a fireable offense if you remove somebody else's tag and re-energize a piece of equipment that you didn't place the lock on, or the tag on, excuse me. If you didn't place it, you don't remove it. There must be consequences. So technically, tags are allowed. However, best practices are locks and tags used in conjunction. So how about our locks? What are the specifics that we're looking for in a lock?
They have to be durable, just like the tag.
Mm-hmm.
They have to be color coordinated according to what they're used for. And
So do they have to be red?
Nope, don't
They
have
do
to be
not?
red.
They do
Depends on
not?
what your procedure, how it's written up. But a color has to be chosen, and you can have multiple colors for different situations.
They have to be standardized.
Yes,
Standardized. So let's say electricians are going to use one color, but your plumbers are going to use another.
exactly.
Not a problem. They have to be standardized in appearance and can't be used for anything else.
Mm-mm.
I can't use this to lock my toolbox. Can't use this to lock up my ladders. I cannot use this for anything other than lockout, tagout. But standardized in type or color, either is allowed. What about the key? The key is a big deal, right? So if we order, say our facility orders 100 locks and they're all keyed the same and we pass these out to our employees, that's not going to work.
Mm-mm.
Because control of the key is an important factor. Once I place this lock on a piece of equipment, I'm going to take that key and that goes in my pocket so that no one else can remove my lock. So if we have a situation where we have multiple employees who are going to be working on a piece of equipment, we have a hasp. Another example would be a group lockbox. You have a variety of different means of being able to allow for multiple employees to work on a piece of equipment, each of them using their own lock. So let's say Bill and I, we've got a project we're working on. We're going to lock out a piece of equipment.
I got a question about the key.
Okay,
Are combination locks okay?
they absolutely are. Combination
Okay.
locks are allowable as well. It can be a keyed lock or a combination lock. Great question.
Okay.
As long as you're the only one with the combination.
That's the big part.
That's it. That's it. So having control of the key or the combination, keeping other people from being able to remove your lock. So we've got a situation where we're both going to be working on a piece of equipment. We can't both put our lock on the disconnect. Just the physical capability of the disconnect isn't going to allow for that. What we would do in that situation is we would use a hasp, and then we would each put our lock on here. And as we finish our task, we've done our servicing that we need to do. I'll take my lock off when I am finished. Bill will take his lock off when he is finished. And then we would remove the hasp and we would be able to put the equipment back into service. So what else? Locks and tags. Any other questions that you have for locks and tags? I know that I've seen a variety of different types of tags. Some of them have pictures on them. Being able to identify who the lock and tag belongs to. What you'll see on these is there's a place for a name. There are a variety of means of ways of identifying whose lock it is. Locks and tags, like I said, should be used in conjunction so that you always have information on here as to who locked the equipment out. Oftentimes it'll include a phone number to be able to get in touch with that person. What other questions have you come across in the field working with?
Can you use a writing instrument that you can erase and reuse the tag?
Now, that's a great question. I've always seen it on there with Sharpie.
Yep.
I've always seen it on there with Sharpie so that it cannot be erased.
Which is
So
what
that
I
the
prefer.
tag is, and that is, I believe, best practice to
Yes.
be able to use the tag once. But I've seen paper ones where they aren't laminated like this one is.
Mhm.
They still have to be durable.
Yes,
But yeah, as far as writing on it with a pencil so you can erase it and reuse it.
but again, somebody else could do that for you.
Right,
So
right.
Best thing to do is use something that you can't.
That's a great
remove.
question. That is a great question. Excellent. Okay, so what about procedures? We talked about procedures and what goes into building a procedure. I've got a couple of examples of procedures here, but as I mentioned, these don't necessarily have to be mounted on the equipment. So the style of procedure can vary. You can have any number of styles as long as the information that is presented can be followed by your authorized employees. So having pictures, not required. It is not required by OSHA or the NFPA 70E that pictures be included. It's nice to have them. Having a picture of the piece of equipment so that you know I'm looking at the correct piece of equipment. I have this procedure. I'm standing in front of the equipment. I can look at it and go, yeah, that's it right here. And then as I get to the lockout points, being able to see a photo, a picture here of that lockout point, again, not required, but very helpful. There are a variety of options in how your procedure itself is put together. So what I have here is just a printed PDF version of a procedure. Having digital procedures is allowable, again, as long as it's available, it's accessible by your authorized employees. The other important thing to note is that you can laminate these and then you can hang them on your equipment. So it's right there. You can have it in a binder at the doorway as you enter the room. You can have it on a tablet. You can have a digital procedure available.
The more that these things explain, the easier they are to understand. Obviously, you don't want somebody that's unqualified following these steps, but the thing is, you want them written so that it is that easy that somebody that's not qualified understands what would happen. But again, you don't want them doing it. But for the qualified people, you want to make sure that the picture relates to the piece of equipment. You don't want to use a picture if it doesn't relate to that piece of equipment. So you want to be careful with your photos. Make sure they are accurate.
And if you choose to not use specific photos, it is possible to use stock photos. I can show an example of a ball valve or a butterfly valve. I can show a stock photo. That's an option as well. Or if I have no photos, this is where the description really needs to be clearly defined. This is exactly what I'm looking for. So you have those options. So an example of, let's say an employee, well, let's say a contractor coming into a facility, he's going to service a piece of equipment. He has the lockout tagout procedure there mounted on the piece of equipment. This is an example of someone who is authorized and may not be as familiar with this particular piece of equipment because it's an outside contractor coming in. So having it clearly written, simple to follow the steps. What you'll see in both of these examples here is it identifies how many lockout points there are. The one I have here, the example, is there are 4 lockout points. And then as it goes through step by step, lockout 1, this is that sequence that we talked about, making sure that it is in order. And it's important, again, with the training, that your employees know how to follow the procedure and they know that this order is important. So I have lockout point 1, 2, 3, and 4. Each of these clearly defined on your procedure. And you can see that we have included in our photos tags on the equipment. Again, optional, not a requirement by OSHA or the NFPA 70E, but certainly good practice, best practice, to have tags that are on the isolation point. We mentioned those valves or disconnects or circuit breakers. Having a tag that identifies that isolation point at the point where the lock is going to be applied is, again, a best practice, but not a requirement. Having those tags also be durable to be able to withstand the environment they're in. If there is heat, humidity, perhaps it's in a freezer, extreme cold conditions, we want to make sure that all of these components are very durable and able to withstand the environment that they're in. So, how can you improve your lockout tagout program today? A couple of really simple steps. You want to conduct an internal audit. Discover what your energy sources are. Identify those that are present on your equipment. Identify those equipment energy sources would be the first step.
Step 2, while your procedures are being developed, require that all equipment must be locked and tagged out for service and checked by a second worker to ensure all sources are identified and isolated correctly.
So to elaborate on that just a little bit, your procedures are not yet developed. You're in the process of doing so. Best practice is to make sure that you are locking out your equipment. It's not having procedures is not an excuse. So you still lock out your equipment. You have 2 of your authorized employees verify that everything has been locked out safely. Just a best practice, a good step to take in that gap between while you're getting your procedures written. And then what would be the third thing that you could do? You could contact Herzig for a gap analysis. We are happy to help to take a look at your existing policy and procedures, have a chance to interview employees on their ability to be authorized or affected. Do they know which they are? Have they had awareness training? We can do a variety of different things. The most basic gap analysis would be a review of your policies and procedures with a report to be able to provide some feedback, areas where you might be able to just improve, strengthen your policy and procedure. And then, we could extend that even further to a full audit, to come on site, do walkthroughs of your equipment, take a look at your procedures, looking at the equipment, verifying and checking with your EHS person on your documented safety training. That would be, again, part of an audit that we could help you to just identify any measures that you could do to strengthen what you have in place.
Herzig is always just a phone call away.
We're happy to help. We are happy to help.
Those of us in the field, we do the same thing. We run into things we don't quite understand. Pick up the phone. There's always somebody here that can help you with whatever your issue or problem is.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Great job, guys. Great job. I learned actually quite a bit today. You guys have been teaching me all about lockout, tagout in more detail over the past 4 years. Great content, guys. All right. So like I had mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat here. I do have one question for you guys already. Okay. This is from Charlie. Charlie and I did not have any breakfast, but that's okay. He asked if a member of the cleaning crew is incapable of performing lockout tagout due to a non-physical handicap, can an authorized mechanic lock out the machine instead?
This is a fantastic question, Charlie. So if I understand correctly, let me just make sure that I understand what you're asking. If you have an employee who is part of the cleaning crew, can a mechanic lock out a piece of equipment for that employee? The answer to that, quite simply, is no. So if the member of the cleaning crew is going to be in harm's way at all, the machine obviously must be locked out. So your authorized employees are the only ones who should be locking out equipment, and other employees should not work underneath their lock.
That person needs the training and qualification to be able to lock out.
To put their own lock. They would need, exactly. They would need the training in order to be authorized for whatever the task is. And I had mentioned that you can have different tiers of authorized. This might be an authorized task. So this employee, this member of the cleaning crew, they would need to be trained to be able to put their lock on the equipment for their specific task, whatever that might be.
So the short answer is no.
The short answer is no. Yes. What other questions do we have today, JJ?
Let's see. I do have a question for you while we have another one chatting right now.
Okay.
Can you kind of go back and let me know if the procedures need to be posted or if they do not have to be posted?
Okay, they do not. As far as the requirement by OSHA and NFPA 70E, the requirement that the procedures be posted that is a no. The procedures must be available and accessible to employees who would need them, who would use them.
Okay. And what would be an example of accessible?
Accessible would be a digital format. So if you have a preventative maintenance program that includes using a tablet or a phone, let's say it has a scanner on it, and you walk up to your equipment and you're gonna do some preventative maintenance on a piece of equipment. I've seen this in multiple facilities. You can walk up, you can scan a barcode or a QR code on your piece of equipment. What's gonna pop up is the history as far as the preventative maintenance on this piece of equipment and what it's due for at the time. Frequently, what those facilities will do that employ that type of technology is they will include that lockout tagout procedure. It is tied to, through an asset number, it is tied to that equipment, and it's a digital procedure. They are looking at it on their phone or on their tablet. It's not physically posted on the equipment. So that would be an example of how that technology would be useful, makes it accessible, available to the employees who need it.
The printed version can be in a 3-ring binder in the room or a designated location, as long as the people that need access to it know where it's at and it's available.
And that's part of the training. It may be, like Bill said, in the room, or it could be in the shop. It could be that you have a binder for lockout, tagout procedures in the shop, but any of the employees who would need access to those procedures know where it's at, know where to get it at any point in time when they might need it. Good question.
Awesome. Hey, we have a couple more questions that have come in.
Okay.
Diane has asked, in lieu of using a separate tag, can you put the required information on a tag that is a sticker on the lock itself?
So having the same information that is required on a tag on a lock, yes. As you can see here, we have danger, do not operate. This says danger, locked out, do not remove. And then you do have a place on the back here, property of. You do have room here, although it's small, to be able to put in a name and a date, and this could be replaced. That would be allowable. Locks or tags used separately or in conjunction. Again, best practices is together, but they can be used separately. Great question, Diane. Thank you.
So basically, if you can write really, really, really small, you can put it on that lock, right?
That is true. Now, if it's a combination lock and it is for that designated purpose, it would have a space on the back, again, where you could apply a sticker. They're filling out the information. Your employees are documenting who's using it, what the date is. It's their lock. They're putting it on there. Oftentimes, like I said, a phone number would be included, and that again could go on the lock itself. You bet.
All right. Wayne has a question. So, can the lockout tagout locks be keyed to have a master lock to unlock by management if it is verified that the employee is not on the property?
That's called a bolt cutter.
Bolt cutters are not allowed. So there are methods of being able to handle situations when somebody is not available to take their lock off. And we didn't dig into that because we were keeping this pretty basic. As far as the master key, that would be a no. However, group lock situations, or if you've got a contractor come in and they put their lock on, you want to make sure that when the contractor leaves that you're not stuck having to cut a lock off. There's a variety of different ways we can dig into that further. Do we have time to go ahead? Yes? Okay. So a situation here would be similar to a group lockout situation. Having either a hasp or a lockbox, a group box. You don't want to have a set of locks with a master key. What you would do in this situation that you are talking about here is having a lead employee who is putting all of the locks on a piece of equipment, and then the key for those locks is going in the lockbox. And then all of the other employees who are going to be working on maintenance, servicing they're going to put their individual lock on the lockbox as well
So that it can't be opened to get access to the first key.
until everybody removes their lock off of the
Yep.
box.
Yep.
Yes. So as each person finishes their task, they will remove their lock off of the box. The lead employee who is responsible for locking out the equipment is going to do the final walk around, make sure that there are no tools, that there are no people who are still working, make sure that all guards are put back in place, make sure that it is ready to put back into service. Theirs will be the final lock that will be taken off, and the key for all of those locks that are on the piece of equipment will be inside the box and will be available. I hope that answers your question, kind of provides a little bit of clarity in how to handle that situation. Any other questions, JJ?
Right now, not as yet, but I would have to say, also it's great to pay attention when you're applying the lockout tagouts and paying attention to your surroundings. Also, when you put your lock on, do not take that key that's supposed to go in your pocket and put it in the big lock box that has everyone locked out on that. Maybe I'm speaking from experience, maybe I'm not, but that's a no-no. So is there any other questions? We're going to hang on for about another minute. Otherwise, we're going to wrap it up. If you have additional questions, please feel free to reach out to us. But overall, great presentation. Again, Sandy, Bill, thank you guys so much for coming on here today and taking time out to explain lockout tagout to everyone here that's on the webinar. Thank you so much. If you do have questions or you'd like to have a quote just for lockout tagout, anything electrical safety, please feel free to reach out to us there, 816-734-8300, or you can even email us at info@herzingengineering.com. Again, I had a great time. Hopefully everyone has a great weekend planned. Please be safe with the 4th coming up. And if there's no more questions, we're going to go ahead and sign off. Oh, we do have one quick question. We do.
Okay.
Charlie. All right. Charlie has asked, will you have additional lockout tagout webinars that dive deeper into the actual performance of lockout tagout? That's a great question. And that's something I'm actually going to take to our management team. But right now, I'm going to say, yes, we're going to have that. All right. And what I'll do is I'll push for that. So thank you, Charlie. Thank you, everyone else. Again, any other questions, please feel free to reach out to us by email or by phone call. Until then, thank you, everyone.